My name is Mia Harrison, and I was the Vice President of Operations for Harrison Home Construction for 29 years. When my phone rang with a voicemail from Dad, I was enjoying my latte. You're out of the family business, Mia, don't. Return 7 years, 73 weeks, and millions in new contracts for my whole. In 15 seconds, my identity vanished, my hands shook, yet my face stayed. I put my phone down, expressionless, while other customers chatted nearby. In answer, I breathed and typed one word: understand if you're watching. Leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching, then click like and subscribe to follow me on this treacherous trek and Harrison Home Construction's reconstruction. Was more than simply a business to me. It was also my home, my future, and my inheritance. I almost inhaled sawdust and plan paper while I was growing up in Portland, Oregon. Mark Harrison, the Walk Dad, began the company 35 years ago with just a Mom used to say, a pickup truck, a toolbox, and an unwavering work ethic. Instead of having blood in his veins, he had concrete. One of my first memories is of my father lifting me up onto his shoulders at construction sites, pointing out foundation and framing work to show how everything works. Begins Mia, everything requires a strong basis so that by the time I was 10, I could read blueprints. By the age of 14, I was assisting with the accounting over the summer. My ancestry was in business, so when it came time to apply to colleges, there was. I never gave much thought to my path because I went to the University of Oregon Double. I graduated with a major in sustainable building design and business administration. Summa cum laude, delivered the graduating address to the students and received 3 job offers. National building companies, and my father was taken aback when I told him I was turning before I even flung my cap. Them all down to work for Harrison Home Construction, but you could see the pride in his eyes. Are you certain, Mia? Are great offers, but we both understood where I belonged when I began the project. I worked harder than the managers, who purposefully avoided any suggestion of nepotism. The crews respected me if I arrived before dawn and left long after dark. I knew what I was talking about and never asked anyone to do anything, not because I was the boss's daughter. Dad, I pointed out supply chain inefficiencies that were costing us thousands of dollars, but I wouldn't fix it myself. By the time I was 27, I had been promoted to operations manager and served as vice president of operations. In 3 states, Harrison Home Construction had grown from residential projects to commercial structures. In the 5 years since I started working full-time, revenue has increased thanks to my creative project management techniques and my family dynamics advocacy for environmentally friendly construction methods had established us as leaders in the Pacific Northwest. Grace Harrison, our more complex mother, was always encouraging, yet she preferred to remain in the background, managing the household while her father established the empire, and she hardly ever expressed her thoughts on. She was obviously proud of me in terms of business, but she also appeared concerned regarding my complete commitment to the business, followed by my brother Ethan's 3 years. He had my father's name and the Harrison name, but he was older yet always a step behind. Square job, but he had little motivation. Ethan was a salesman, and while he was personable enough to attract clients, but he didn't follow through, so I frequently had to clean up after him. His messes made promises that our teams couldn't realistically fulfill. Dad had a special place for him, even though he didn't first consult engineering. He'll get used to it, Dad would say. Despite Ethan's flaws, not everyone gets off to the same start as you had, Mia. Dad had always made it obvious that you and your brothers will eventually own everything. Equal partners, Harrison's legacy, and I firmly believed him. Why wouldn't I? Committed my life to making sure that legacy would flourish after we broke. We have begun construction on our most ambitious project to date, a downtown mixed-use building. Portland prioritized sustainable urban living, which was primarily my idea. Every apartment building above a store was built using materials that were found locally, including solar panels and rainwater. Harrison Westside Commons collecting systems and common green areas would be our most notable accomplishment, and the one that would solidify our standing as progressive builders at the. Dad gave me the golden shovel during the groundbreaking ceremony and said, "This is your baby." Mia, he remarked so that everyone could hear about Harrison Construction's future. I recall the shovel's weight, the way it felt in my hands, and how obvious my course appeared to be that evening at the celebration. At supper, Dad made a toast to Mia, who recognizes the potential of buildings, but everyone praised them as they should have, and even Ethan grinned, though it wasn't quite. How could I have predicted that, in just 6 months, I would be standing in a coffee shop, staring into his eyes? I had contributed to the construction of the foundation, which I believed to be strong, but it contained flaws that I never discovered, and I can tell when they were going to split open again. Started to change, although at the time, the modifications were so slight that they could be ignored. During our quarterly planning meeting, approximately 3 months before to that fateful message, I had prepared an comprehensive presentation on increasing the use of environmentally friendly materials in all projects. The data showed that our environmentally friendly constructions were fetching high prices and producing favorable press, but Dad looked at his watch as I brought up the slides. "Let's table. We have more urgent issues right now, Mia," but he never mentioned what they were. That same week, I observed Dad and Ethan eating lunch together, which odd in and of itself, but they stopped having these meals every day. Just some father-son catch-up. When I walked up to their table, Dad would reply with a dismissive wave, and then the introducing Richard Maxwell, a semi-retired CEO from a large corporation and my father's former college friend. Richard's father hired him as a strategic consultant for the building company without first talking to me. When I questioned the choice, Dad said that he had 40 years of experience in the industry. He will guide us through this stage of growth. Maxwell was tall, silver-haired, and possessed the artificial humor of someone who found comfort in his own jokes while examining our contracts, looking at our procedures, and probing our client contacts when I requested to view. I began to notice little changes in his reports, which Dad assured me were still in development. Judgments being overturned for a supplier of sustainable materials that I had examined and authorized. Was abruptly fired, and the project manager I had employed was moved to the marketing. The Harrison Westside Commons campaign I created was put on hold for a while. We're reevaluating. It's a timing issue. Every time I asked for clarifications, I got evasive answers. Returned to the Tuesday afternoon when I entered the meeting room and saw my father, Ethan Richard, present. During a meeting that I was unaware of, 2 board members had drawings scattered across the table that included changes to. I inquired about the Westside Commons design, which removed numerous sustainable elements. Unable to control my voice, my dad looked up in a moment of surprise, just investigating a few value engineering possibilities, but nothing definitive. Value engineering. Removing the rainwater system and solar array, 2 essential components of the plan that the city authorized. Richard Maxwell cleared his throat, stating that our permits were based on these factors. The ROI on these features may have been overestimated in the initial projections. We're just adjusting to the realities of the market. I calculated those figures myself. Dad stepped up and retorted, "They're solid, and we've already ordered materials." "We can talk about this later, Mia. Richard has some interesting points." Felt the room closing in on me. These changes weren't small ones. Rather, they represented a major departure from the original plan. Everyone had approved of what I had made, but my assistant was keeping me out of the talk that night. After Jessica requested a quiet conversation, we strolled to a neighboring park far from the office. Looking about as if concerned about being overheard, she continued, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but your dad, Ethan, and Mr. Maxwell have been meeting virtually daily. On 2 occasions, when you're out touring, and Mr. Maxwell's son, Connor." Jessica was uneasy during interviews for the post she was applying for. They showed him around as though he had already been hired, but they didn't say anything specific. Your office was a part of. I attempted to explain that maybe they were hearing more management for the tour expansion, but why the secrecy? Why don't I participate in these conversations? I visited my parents' place over the weekend for our monthly family meal, and my mother appeared. When her father left to answer a call, she was preoccupied and kept checking her phone. Be careful, she whispered, leaning close to me. What do you mean, Mom? Just keep an eye on your father's back. He hasn't been thinking straight lately, before she could. I tried to catch her alone, but she quickly shifted the topic to her garden club when her extravagant dad returned. Once more that night, but she didn't want to be by herself with me when I was leaving. Held me more tightly than normal, as if to say goodbye instead of see you soon. The next week, I was specifically. When I approached my father, he refused to let me attend a business dinner with a significant prospective client. Why he said the meeting was informal and unofficial, and why I found that they had executed a draft contract for the construction of a luxury condominium complex, a project type that I had really recommended against because of market saturation, as each incidence alone may be. Described in detail, they created a pattern that I was at last starting to acknowledge that there was something going on at Harrison Home Construction that didn't seem to involve me, but despite these warning indicators, I had no idea how swiftly and totally the axe would fall. April 17th started off like any another Tuesday in Portland's spring meant rain, but the clouds had parted enough for sunshine to shine through. I headed to our newest location to speak with a client of Greenfield Developers, interested in a big business initiative that complemented our focus on sustainable building. We spent last week creating thorough proposals and projecting costs for what might be our biggest contract to date. The summit took place on a campus of office buildings built to platinum standards. Remarkably well, CEO Martin Greenfield seems to be impressed by the creative. He said, "Your passion for sustainable building is exactly what we're looking for, Mia," in response to my suggested methods. I think Harrison is the right partner for us. I shook hands and contacted the office right away, but I received my. I then excitedly left a message on my father's voicemail on the possible new contract. Thought that I deserved a small treat, so I treated myself to coffee before leaving. Moreover, this agreement would increase our yearly income by millions and provide employment. Due to the mid-morning rush, the coffee shop was crowded for dozens of employees. I located a peaceful spot and got my customary big latte with an extra shot. Rain had returned to the window near the table, pattering against the glass. As I was waiting for my drink, I took out my tablet to go over some emails when my phone buzzed and my dad's name appeared on the. I was excited to deliver the wonderful news about Greenfield, but screen timing was perfect. Strangely, the call went straight to voicemail rather than being answered, so I picked up my. When the voicemail notice came up, I hit play and kept the phone to my ear while grinning. My father's voice sounded flat and businesslike after the successful meeting. Greetings, the board convened this morning and agreed to reorganize the business. Leadership that takes effect right away if you leave the family business and have access to has been canceled and your job has been filled. Please do not return to the office or telephone. Your personal belongings will be brought to your apartment. This is the last word. The message concluded with no. I remained motionless as the automated voice asked if I wanted to save or delete the message without providing an explanation or saying farewell. The barista yelled my name while the phone was still pressed to my ear, but it seemed far away underwater, so I put it down. Slowly looking at the screen, as though it would provide some context for the message that my mind had been racing over. Potential outcomes: was this an error or a joke, and had my father's phone been taken? But I recognized the steady, purposeful tone of his voice when decisions could not be changed, and I had a sharp agony in my chest as if someone had reached within. It made my breathing shallow around me by squeezing my heart. Computers clicked, espresso machines hissed, and they carried on talking. My world went on with its daily activities, but mine collapsed when the barista called my name. I stood on unsteady legs and retrieved my drink once more adamantly this time. Automatically thanking her, I put down the untouched cappuccino at my table and gazed at my phone, wondering what one would say if their identity, future, and life's work were taken away. I could call and request explanations in a 15-second voicemail. I could have cried, screamed, or begged as I drove to the office, but instead I opened my messaging app. I entered a single word, clicked send, and then I collected my. I walked out into the rain, leaving my unfinished coffee on the table. I spent hours driving aimlessly, seeing structures that I had assisted in creating the refurbished Parkside offices of Miller, with their characteristic curving facade. Apartments for which we received a design award, the primary school that we rebuilt following the fire, and scheduled to allow children to go back to their accustomed classes, each building represented a physical chapter in my life. Symbols of my commitment and vision, now standing as reminders of what I had lost, I finally discovered who I was. Parked outside the exposed brick warehouse that was turned into my apartment building. And tall windows, I had picked it because it was only a 15-minute drive to the office. What did closeness mean to the door? My flat felt strange all of a sudden. Dad gave me pictures of family get-togethers on the bookshelf that served as the model for our first business job when I poured myself into the hard hat with Harrison printed on the side, which I had worn on innumerable websites, and we won the auction. I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine when the Portland lights went out. Flickered on across the city's residences and workplaces, where people were concluding their typical Tuesday without realizing that Mia Harrison's entire world had just fallen apart, and my phone was still silent. Mom calls me, but my coworkers don't text me, asking where I've gone. My father and I were separated by that heartbreaking message and my one-word reply that was floating in cyberspace. Comprehended, but why and how couldn't you kindly think again about acknowledging? Since it was the only thing I could do to keep him from accepting me in that time of shock and betrayal. Whether it was wrath or satisfaction from my begging, I slept fitfully that night and woke up. I kept checking my phone, half thinking it had all been a nightmare, but when daylight arrived, reality still prevailed. Unaltered, I left without warning, without speaking, and without having an opportunity to justify myself. Simply severed from the Harrison family's body like a gangrenous limb back in the day. I woke up the following morning with a brief case of amnesia as the message faded together, fumbling for my phone to check. I tried to log into my work emails out of habit before reality hit again. The business system in any case, my company credit displayed on the screen with access refused. My keycard wouldn't open the office building doors when I tried to purchase coffee, as if overnight someone had methodically destroyed my professional life, and my phone was beeping nonstop with texts, and I am receiving calls from perplexed clients and coworkers, including Martin Greenfield from yesterday's meeting in Mia. Is it true that odd things call me suppliers with whom we have developed relationships? Harrison project managers are now searching for guidance on ongoing work because of you. Couldn't bring myself to respond to the voicemail informing me that I had been fired and that I didn't know why. After 7 years of commitment, I was fired without warning on the third day when I tried the house phone number and phoned Mom straight to voicemail, but I still hadn't heard from any family members. Even though we had never been close, I tried Ethan's response. It seemed as though by day 5, I was in dire need of a funeral because no one had thought to arrange one. Details: I texted Jessica to ask if we could meet, and we set up a time to do so at. She arrived at a diner across town, far from the workplace, appearing anxious and peering. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you," she murmured over her shoulder as she slid into the booth, as soon as they made non-disclosure agreements on the transition are signed by everyone, Jessica. Happened quickly, and I need to know that she fidgeted with her napkin. After you departed for the Greenfield meeting on Monday afternoon, they called, and your father informed everyone that the business was going back to its origins and concentrating on developing upscale residential properties. Connor Maxwell, Maxwell's son, was then announced as the new VP of Operations. Things began to fall into place, and it appears that he has been shadowing in numerous ways. Departments for weeks, after which your father stated that you chose to seek alternative options and that any correspondence should now go through Ethan or Connor. That's a lie, and I was fired by. After following my career's most fruitful client meeting, Jessica appeared distressed. There are more Mias. Methodically tearing down all you created for the sustainability projects. The diversified hearing policies and community partnerships are being retracted. The Westside Commons has undergone a total makeover with just luxury and no green aspects. I felt physically sick in condos with high price tags, but why those projects were lucrative and helped us stand out in the market, Richard Maxwell persuaded. Your father, that luxury development has fewer restrictions and offers quick money, greater margins, and she was hesitant because of your father's health. Heard him discussing therapies for his ailing father. Why didn't he tell me? I'm not familiar with specifics, but he has been discussing medical possibilities in private, Jessica added. The complete picture that Richard Maxwell had planned came to light as the gaps were filled. A total internal takeover of the business, designating his son as my replacement. Ethan, my brother, was often envious of my stronger bonds with the crews and my performance history. Together, they had persuaded my father that the business needed to veer away from my idea of. Another thing is the return of luxury projects with rapid returns that emphasize sustainable community-focused construction. When I arrived yesterday, Jessica stated softly, your office was entirely. Boxes were sent to your apartment building by a courier service after they cleaned out. Did you receive them? I hadn't When I got home, I asked my doorman, and sure enough, 4 big boxes had been delivered that morning, and I felt as though I was carrying parts of a corpse within as I brought them up one by one. Were the mementos of my career in the family photography sector, which won the. I took my degrees off the wall and maintained the plant alive for 5 years, client. Some of the frames damaged the soil of the plant, and the thank you letters were all carelessly packed. A legal document was spilled all over the bottom of the final box. 3 months of severance, money in exchange for a separation agreement waiving any claims against Harrison Home Construction. In my father's handwriting, a yellow sticky note is signed and returned for payment. I began my investigation that evening and let the paper drop out of my hands. Sincerely, I gave an old classmate who was employed at a rival construction company a call. Have you heard anything lately about Harrison Construction? The answer is yes. There are rumors of financial difficulties, and they are making a significant shift to luxury development. Obtain significant cash for a project that someone mentioned your dad has been trying to sell a controlling stake in. I had only been reviewing the accounts for a few weeks when I received the news that our finances had remained stable. I made a timeline of events a while back, starting with the voicemail. Richard Maxwell's arrival, the meeting secret, and the progressive marginalization of my depicts Connor's debut. It wasn't an impulsive choice, but rather the most agonizing part of the planned coup that had been going on for months as I labored blindly to expand the business. Epiphany occurred when I checked my personal email and discovered messages from customers who were unclear about. Modified promises were made in contracts that I had allegedly approved. Retracted the use of my name to support choices I never made. They hadn't only took me away, using my notoriety as a weapon to destroy everything I'd. Therefore, I sought advice from Samantha Reed, a family law specialist. Business conflicts, and after assessing my case, she gave me a tough reality check. Verify whether you signed any employment contracts, shareholder agreements, or operational agreements when you joined the company. I had typical papers, of course, but these documents, she said. Citing particular provisions that essentially restrict your options, you acknowledged that your father's board has complete operational discretion, and, despite being family, you are not promised a position as a staff member. You are prohibited from working with any Harrison clients for 2 years by a non-compete agreement, but there must be an exception. Family enterprises that engage in gray areas, such as wrongful termination and defamation, MIA, They relied on your confidence, which you regrettably granted them in a fully legal manner. Your choices are restricted. I was dejected when I left her office because I had not only lost my job and my family with a single strike, but 2 weeks after the voicemail, I had unintentionally given up my chance to defend myself. To my breaking point, with no family members contacting me. There are whispers going around the industry regarding my departure from clients I had been cultivating ties with for years. Unreachable, therefore, I determined that my only choice was to drive directly. For as long as I could remember, it was a Sunday night family dinner night at my parents' house. As I got closer, I noticed vehicles in the driveway: Ethan's Audi, my mother's Volvo, my father's Range Rover, and two strange cars, one probably owned by Richard Maxwell, were. I parked across the street and watched the house through the dining room windows while the family ate dinner without me. Could observe them all seated at the table, with the mother passing food and the father at the head of. The Maxwells. Richard and a younger man were at the table where Ethan typically sat, making gestures while he spoke. They must have been Connor, my successor, because they were laughing and eating as though I had never. Being a part of their life, I nearly barged in and beat on the door demanding answers, but I was halted by something, and an eerie silence descended. As I observed this scene of treachery, they had decided to create a scene wouldn't alter the fact that I got in the car and drove off, my determination solidifying. With every smile, my mother texted me the following day to say, "Coffee tomorrow." We met alone at a little bistro that was distant from the Harrison headquarters, and my mom from my parents' house appeared older and exhausted, but she held on to me when she hugged me. Extended than normal. "I'm so sorry, Mia," she remarked once we were seated. "This isn't." "Then why is it happening? Why didn't you warn me?" she asked anxiously, looking around. "What I wanted. Your father is not feeling well, and the doctors discovered serious blockages in his heart that require surgery. And it would take a long time to recover. He began to worry about the company's future, so he cut me out." "Absolutely nonsensical, Mom," and she refused to look me in the eyes. "Richard persuaded him that you intended to exploit his illness as a pretext to force Ethan out in order to carry out your own takeover. That's utterly ridiculous, and I've never seen Richard's evidence of an email meeting. Notes discussions with clients over new leadership. When your father resigned, I was unable to express how. Dad urged me to participate in succession planning talks and advised me to begin transition planning within the next 5. Richard presented it in a different way over the years, and your brother, she left Ethan behind. Assisted them, didn't he? He has always been angry that his father trusted me to perform surgeries rather than his mother. Richard provided an alternative, saying his son Connor might fill in during your. Ethan managing client ties and returning to family during the father's recuperation. Richard said it like way, values. What about me? I'm your father and your family. Believes that you have transformed Mia's focus on sustainability and the community. He claims that these projects are not what Harrison Construction was created for. Richard persuaded him that you were transforming his business into something he wouldn't recognize, and the deception was more profound. With every disclosure, my father was tricked into accusing me of being disloyal by using my own initiative against me. Attempting to change the business, and instead of speaking with me directly, he had decided to assume the worst and fire me. Without saying anything, why a voicemail, Mom, after all I've done for the business too? Wonderful family, why was he unable to confront me? She turned away, and he was terrified. You've always been convincing, Mia, so you talk him out of it. He couldn't take the chance. As we resumed our talk, I saw that Ethan had been facing you squarely, methodically undermining me for months by gathering quotes that are out of context and misrepresenting what I said in reports to our. Richard Maxwell, my father, had fabricated evidence that I was secretly preparing to launch my own business and bring Harrison's clientele along, but the last straw was when Richard displayed your father viewed an email in which you purportedly talked about relocating client ties away from Harrison as. The greatest betrayal is that the email is fake, Mom. I think you However, your father is afraid of dying, therefore he doesn't or won't. We said our goodbyes with a lengthy embrace, and I'll attempt to speak with him. We both realized it was too late, but we agreed to meet when he recovered from the surgery. The actual scope of the sabotage was revealed in the weeks that followed the damage. Became evident that former coworkers had discreetly contacted me to inform me that Ethan and Connor were methodically demolishing my professional reputation, implying that I had failed to fulfill commitments and oversee projects. Key stakeholders were alienated by the corporation, and my name was taken off of. The Harrison team was now given credit for the company website initiatives that ID led. Even though the sustainability projects ID supported were being scaled, they were being promoted as Ethan's idea. Back considerably, the financial hardship started to severely impact my savings while, since substantial weren't limitless, I would always put the majority of my bonuses back into. Due to transfer constraints, I was unable to sell the company stock, and the severance offer was still pending on my. Pride wouldn't pay my mortgage sector to counter that, but doing so would validate their version of events. Because of the non-compete clause, contacts who had previously been willing to work together did not answer my calls. My professional persona had become so intertwined with the Harrison family that I was unable to contact any of their clients. Business that, without it, I appeared to vanish one night when I passed the sign at the Westside Common location had been altered to read, "No more sustainable urban living." Now it promoted opulent apartments starting at the $800, all of which I worked on. As if it had never happened, my vision was vanished. I stopped and observed the darkened. Tears spilling down my face from a building site was the last proof that everything I had constructed was being taken apart, board by board, brick by brick. That evening when I signed the separation agreement, not just my career, but also my legacy. I mailed it because I needed to live long enough to rebuild, not because I agreed with their version of events. When the check arrived the following morning, I felt as though I was signing my own professional death certificate, but I was unable to bring. I thought that depositing it for days to purchase my silence was tainted blood money. And vanishing, but ultimately, pragmatic necessity triumphed over the idea that the money would buy me time. And time was what I most needed in order to recover, make plans, and ultimately get up. By the third month following the voicemail I received, I had once more risen from the ashes of treachery. Reached my lowest point, I had to move from my large apartment to a small studio in a less desirable area to save money because the severance money was running out sooner than I had expected. In the construction sector, interviews inexplicably stopped after initial. Thus, the Harrison name had turned into a liability instead than a strength. There are enough of those in Portland on wet nights, so I sat on the floor of my new. Among half-unpacked boxes in my flat, I had been sipping wine directly from the bottle while looking through old pictures on my laptop projects. I'd overseen family gatherings and team celebrations. At the office, my life's labors reduced to a few cardboard boxes and digital memories. Saw a picture of my father's arm around my shoulders at the Westside Commons groundbreaking, both of us in a difficult. His smile was sincere as he held the golden shovels. Was he already making plans to ignore me even at that point, if anything in my career had been genuine in that? In a time of despair, I nearly gave up and thought about leaving Portland, changing careers and starting again in a place where no one knew Harrison's name. Perhaps I might become a real estate agent or teach construction management at a community college in another state. Or give up on the business completely. My phone rang unexpectedly and I couldn't identify the number. Didn't respond at all, but out of desperation, I picked up Mia Harrison, my. Even I could hear the hollowness in her voice. Mia, it's Catherine Walsh. Was the proprietor of Walsh Community Developments, a smaller company that specialized in projects involving affordable housing. Worked together on a joint venture 2 years prior that was a mixed-income housing complex that had received multiple accolades for. Catherine's creative design within financial limits is surprising. I've been trying to contact you for weeks, but your cell goes straight to voicemail and your email bounces back. I apologize for not checking messages frequently. There have been too many awkward discussions to handle. Transitioning, and I've heard that industry rumors spread quickly. She stopped to listen. I don't know the specifics of what transpired at Harrison, and to be honest, I don't care. What I do know is that when we collaborated, I had never worked with a more capable and creative project manager than you. I felt a glimmer of my former professional confidence for the first time in months. Thank you, it means a lot. I have a proposal for you, Mia, and it's not simply flattery at the moment. We've been given a contract on a low budget for a small community center in North Portland. Tough site sustainability standards, you were the first person that came to mind, Catherine. I am grateful for the vote of confidence, but I've had my lawyer look over my non-compete agreement, and I can't. Wouldn't go against the agreements. It's a whole different client than Harrison's. We may organize it so that you would be a consultant rather than an employee of a rival company in a different market category. The prospect of working once more and creating something worthwhile was alluring, but fear kept me from moving forward. I don't know Catherine, so I'm not sure whether I'm prepared to return right away. Give it some thought before we begin. 2 weeks after we hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand while working on the basic design. A chance when I believed I had no more options, but did I have the guts to face the next day? Brought to yet another surprising connection, an email from my father's father, George Phillips. 15 years ago, his original company partner sold his stake after retiring. Learned of my leaving and desired to meet, so we went to his humble home. At 75, George maintained his keen mind and skill, maintaining an outstanding workshop in the back where he still constructed custom furniture as a pastime. He stated bluntly that your father's making the same mistake he made with me, following. Just pushing out the person who could take the company forward because he's afraid of change. George told me of a past conflict between him and my father that I was unaware of. Expansion strategies and the ways in which my father had diluted George's stake until it made more sense to sell than combating the way their 40-year friendship ended due of commercial disputes. Mia, your father creates lovely structures, but he destroys connections with the same efficiency. Even when his vision is out of date, he can't tolerate anyone questioning it. When we spoke, George disclosed that he had kept journals throughout his work, including his collaboration with my father. Took a box out of his studio and gave me a number of leather-bound notebooks. Perhaps these will help you gain some perspective. In family enterprises, history tends to repeat itself, and that night I began reading. The early years of Harrison Building, initially known as Phillips and Harrison Builders, were described in George's writings. Includes a design that my grandfather, Thomas Harrison, had that was remarkably similar. Used similar methods to force out his own brother from the family's former construction company 30 years prior. It was a generational trend of seclusion and disloyalty charges. The Harrison men were equally committed to burning bridges and building enterprises. Journals allowed me to glimpse something unexpected for the first time. My circumstances as a result of a dysfunctional family pattern that existed before my father, not as a personal failing. Wasn't only betraying me, he was also acting in a way that he had picked up from his own father. The suffering, but it enabled me to distance myself from it. This wasn't about how well I performed or how valuable I was. Rather, it was about fear of change, fear of losing control, fear of dying, and unrelated fears. With me and anything related to the distrustful Harrison legacy, the following. I contacted Catherine Walsh in the morning and agreed to her offer of consultation, after which I sat. Using a notebook, I started drawing out a business plan, not for a construction company, at my tiny kitchen table. Non-compete agreements prevented that, but for a consulting firm that specializes in green building principles. Horizon Consulting would provide knowledge about sustainable development, energy-efficient design, and environmentally acceptable materials. Construction techniques, I would focus on smaller businesses that don't have internal sustainability specialists but wish to participate in an market. Companies like Catherine's, which are becoming more environmentally sensitive, were starting anew. Frightening that I had no clients outside of Catherine, had little money, and a reputation that had been steadily damaged, but I had experience, expertise, and a newfound motivation. That went beyond family heritage. I registered the company name the following day and made a basic website the following day. Following the ordering of business cards with the principal and founder, Mia Harrison. Every little step is printed by the consultant in a straightforward, business-like font. Restored a portion of my damaged self-esteem, and Catherine's community center initiative served as my lifeline. I fully immersed myself in investigating cutting-edge materials that could satisfy budgetary constraints and sustainability objectives. Restrictions, I used innovative combinations of passive design components to create alternatives to costly systems. Knowing that this project would make or ruin my new business, I put in more effort than I had ever done at Harrison. Showed the community board the finished design, and their enthusiastic acceptance seemed like confirmation, not just of my work, but of my identity as a professional outside of the Harrison name. After that, a board member came up to me. We've been attempting to make this work for years, but the large companies either couldn't. You managed to either prioritize our environmental goals or satisfy our budget. His remarks were the first clear-cut professional compliment I had heard since the message, I realized. For months, I had been waiting for someone to affirm that I was still valuable without the support of Harrison. I took a stroll through the Northside Community Center's construction site that evening. Now that the foundations were made of plywood and concrete, I could see the completed structure. Reclaimed timber and solar panels that served as shade structures collected rainwater for the communal garden. I put my hand from a destroyed warehouse that served as the main meeting area on a freshly laid foundation wall that hasn't completely cured yet. My father told me long ago that everything requires a strong foundation. He had been discussing buildings, but the lesson also related to life. I was pouring a new foundation, not concrete this time, but of honesty, self-reliance, and fortitude for the first time since that. When my world fell apart in a coffee shop, I was truly optimistic about the future, not the one I had imagined. But maybe the future I was creating for myself was the one I needed, one that was strategically. 1 year following the voicemail that had rocked my world, at the Pacific Northwest Sustainable Building Awards, Horizon Consulting was standing in a hotel ballroom. The Northside Community Center, which was nominated for innovation in community-focused architecture, had opened 2 months earlier. We would have been under budget due to the positive response from the community. Exceeded estimates for energy efficiency. More significantly, the area had instantly turned into a bustling community center, just as we had imagined when they made the announcement, and the ovation felt like confirmation that Green Horizon Consulting, the Northside Community Center's winner. As I took the glass medal for the hardest year of my life, I habitually looked around the audience, partly expecting to see my. There was no father or brother present, of course, but Harrison Home Construction had ceased going to industry gatherings centered on sustainability after I was accepted. During my succinct statement, I thanked Catherine Walsh for believing in me when others wouldn't. I also acknowledged I dedicated the award to people who are beginning over and thanked the community board for their commitment and trust. Constructing new foundations when existing ones fail following the ceremony, a number of minor. Several owners of midsize construction companies contacted me regarding possible contracts when news got out about what we'd completed at Northside with little funding, and my calendar was packed with. Green Horizon Consulting was doing well. I had brought on 2 junior consultants and we were thinking about hiring a project manager after moving from my flat to a modest but respectable office in a newly refurbished warehouse. I was aware of the irony that my father had let me go from a business called. After my family and I had established a prosperous company based on a vision, it was during this time of professional atonement once word spread throughout the industry regarding Harrison Home Construction. The cost of Channel's opulent condo conversion of my Westside Commons project was severely problematic. overruns, quality problems, and environmental permit violations. Promises in the initial approval, I didn't like their hardships, but I also wasn't shocked by Harrison's. Has always been to make huge promises and figure out how to achieve them later without having a detail-oriented manager. Operations without my presence, those assurances were getting harder to fulfill, and then I received the call that I had been waiting months for and dreading. Late one evening, I saw my mother's name on my phone screen. Your father had a heart attack. Everything appeared to stop, but he was still my. They performed emergency surgery on the father, but it was a serious MIA. I sat with that information for a while before he fired me. He's asking for you. He allowed Ethan and Richard Maxwell to ruin my voicemail mom reputation. He removed me from my own family without speaking to me. I'll never be able to forgive myself for allowing her voice to crack. But your father is still alive and may not have much time left. The hospital room was dark when I got there. The bed tubes and wires that connected him to several equipment made father appear little. Ethan's father was conspicuously absent, and my mother sat next to him, holding his hand. When I got close enough to recognize him, his eyes opened, and a look of embarrassment crossed his face, and his voice was feeble. And when your mother remarked, "You asked for me," he gave a small nod, and I took action. I didn't argue with you or provide you an easy way out, but you did, so I let. I'm afraid of losing control and that the company will change too much. He coughed out of dread of being unimportant, and his mother gave him some water. Richard played on those anxieties, leading me to feel that you intended to force me to leave and alter everything we had created, which I would never have completed that, and I am aware that he is now ignoring Harrison. Everything I did was to support the business you founded. Mia Construction is having major problems. Without you, we wouldn't be the same. I'm sorry to hear that, but a part of me wanted to relish this recognition and validation, yet it felt hollow. However, I now operate my own business, and I've heard that Green Horizon is doing well. Of pride appeared on his face. You're adjusting and evolving in a way that I couldn't. Discussed family and patterns for about an hour, in addition to business. Stated over and again how the Harrison men's very legacy was lost because they were afraid of losing control. It wasn't a flawless reconciliation, and my father was so anxious to keep it that he never apologized directly. And we came to some sort of agreement and recognition of what had been lost, even though I didn't offer total forgiveness. And what could still be saved as I was departing, not in business but in family. He said, "I left you a voicemail," to which you just responded. Realized that's when I started to question what I had done, and you didn't plead. Simply accepted it with greater decorum than I had displayed when giving the. I told him it was the only strength I had left in that situation, but it wasn't acceptance. He nodded slowly, denying you the joy of witnessing me break. Mia, you created something fresh out of nothing and are stronger than any Harrison before you. In the months that followed, our family started a careful journey, and I've only ever known how to follow the path previously established. Dad and I talked, and we extended our weekly lunch dates as part of the healing process. Occasionally, mostly on unrelated subjects, as we cautiously negotiated our new relationship. Ethan eventually expressed regret following the breakdown of the Maxwell partnership, allowing him to deal with the fallout from choices he didn't fully comprehend. Harrison Home Construction persisted, but in a smaller capacity. They sold the problematic Westside Commons project to a developer who, in a paradoxical. My father stepped in and engaged Green Horizon to provide advice on how to make it more sustainable. I turned down invitations to rejoin after leaving my position as CEO to take up a chairmanship with no involvement in daily operations. I periodically crossed the bridges that were burned to the family company, but they were too structurally sound to do so securely. As a professional courtesy, provide advice on certain Harrison initiatives when requested. 2 years following the voicemail, I was able to satisfy both parties without rehashing previous scars. Saw the groundbreaking for Green Horizon's first design-build project at a separate construction site. collaborated with Catherine Walsh's company to develop sustainable, reasonably priced homes for healthcare workers. Symbolized all that, in my opinion, construction could and ought to be environmentally focused and community centered. Fiscally feasible and responsible, when I drove the ceremonial shovel into the soil, I rethought that foundations ought to be both sturdy and adaptable, sufficient to endure changing circumstances, how the strongest structures may emerge from cleared land instead of. The voicemail that had crushed me had also, ironically, been patched, released me from the limitations imposed by conventional norms and family expectations. Instead of making concessions to keep the peace, thinking allowed me to create something that genuinely expressed my values. Allowed me to find strengths I didn't know I had when the resources I had been depending on were abruptly taken away. My father had remarked, "I understand," but I had responded not as. But as the opening line of a new chapter, I would write to myself that one word had been a promise to. I recognized the vow I made to myself, my principles, and my vision. Even though I had lost, I knew that my value went beyond what I could still produce. Beyond the Harrison name, I realized that the most significant foundation in life isn't made of concrete and steel, but with honesty, fortitude, and the guts to start again today As I observe the group donning green horizon hard hats, I am incredibly appreciative of that difficult lesson in losing my inherited legacy. I discovered my true calling in exile. If you've ever had to start again after being betrayed, I hope my journey home to myself. When everything familiar is taken away, our greatest strength can sometimes be shown. A narrative can give you courage. The most exquisite buildings can occasionally emerge from the ashes of things we once believed we couldn't survive without. Thank you for accompanying me on this trip. If this story touched you, please tell someone who would benefit from hearing it. After suffering a terrible loss, it is possible to survive and even thrive. Please leave a comment. If you'd like to hear more about a moment when you had to rebuild after something fell apart, subscribe below. Tales of perseverance and rebirth, and keep in mind that sometimes understood isn't the conclusion of the discussion. It marks the start of an entirely new discussion with yourself regarding your true nature and what you can construct.